I think there's a little bit of blame. I think they enjoy certain aspects of their neurodivergence, but there are other elements when it's hard and they really just want to be like peers rather than looking to me and saying, she's doing okay. Sometimes there's resentment there that this is hard for me and I got this from you.
That makes
That
sense.
makes sense. But it's awesome to be able to have these conversations and for me to try to share the coping mechanisms I have. I think it does, in some ways, help them feel less alone, knowing dad goes through this, mom goes through that. This is how they deal, and I'm like them, and that's cool. So it really depends on the day. Sometimes it's very affirming and positive, and other times it's I'm 16 and I just want to get my license and I just want to go to parties like everybody else. Why is it not like this for me? Yeah.
Welcome to Atypical Kids Mindful Parents podcast, the neurodiversity affirming parenting podcast that helps parents feel less alone. I'm Kate Lynch, a mindfulness coach and parent of an amazing atypical kid. And I interview parents and experts who share my mission to create a kinder, more inclusive future. You can look forward to grounding practices, relatable parenting stories, and groundbreaking strategies. Follow us here for connection and support. Let's go on this journey together. Welcome to Julie M. Green, a writer and artist based in Kingston, Canada. She's the author of Motherness, a forthcoming memoir about her experiences as a late diagnosed autistic woman. She was recently longlisted for the 2024 CBC Nonfiction Prize. Bylines include the Washington Post, HuffPost, Globe and Mail, Healthline, Parents, and more. She's appeared on CTV, BBC Radio, CBC Radio, and she writes The Autistic Mom on Substack, which is where we connected. I love the subtitle of your book, Julie, A Memoir of Generational Autism, Parenthood, and Radical Acceptance. And I'm really excited to talk with you about your writing and also parenting focused on connection rather than fear. And we've talked a little bit about radical acceptance. And this is something that's always a goal of mine. Where should we start? Where do you feel like starting?
Well, just as you were saying that, this whole piece of radical acceptance, I think it's not only about your children, so much is about radical acceptance, about how we show up as parents and how we show up as people. And frankly, I think you're probably in a similar situation. I feel like a pioneer when it comes to autism parenting, because my teenager just turned 16, which is still making my head spin. And I think yours is 13 or thereabouts.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I think things have evolved in some crazy ways and some good ways. So I think it feels important to me as an old hand to talk about where I was, like my child. I'll call Carson because I changed their name as much as possible since I write so publicly. They were diagnosed at 3, and things were so different then. And I'm hopeful that things have moved on, but I don't know if the narrative has totally shifted in terms of pressure on mothers in particular, because I think we do tend to be the main caregivers, the ones doing all the paperwork, doing all the to and from therapy appointments, the ones worrying. I mean, obviously all parents worry, but I think a lot of for me anyway, a lion's share of this sort of work. And I mean, children in general, but particularly when you have a neurodivergent child. The message back then, when my son was diagnosed, was very much, you have to do all the things. You have to do it really, really quickly. The earlier, the better. How they will turn out and if they will thrive, it is all up to you. So just a little bit of pressure.
Absolutely. And then we were so stressed, right? The stress then impacts them.
Yeah, the learning curve back then as well. We did not have the awareness. We had Rain Man, which, everyone keeps citing that. And then eventually we had Temple Grandin, but we had very, very little to go on. So, in addition to all that pressure and timeliness, needless to say, I internalized a lot of that. It makes me sad to think about it now, but I was just searching through my husband's phone one day, his old iCloud account or something. So he had, unbeknownst to me, he had recorded some videos of my son and I when he was totally little, cute, squeaky voice. And he had this candid little video of us playing together. And I think we were doing some imaginary play, maybe like a picnic. And God, the kid was super, super adorable. But there I was. I could see like we weren't just playing and enjoying the moment. I was sort of working with them. Even though I was in that moment when I should have just been enjoying them and connecting them, I was still pushing this agenda. And it really made me sad to see this all these years later. You know, therapy has its time and place, but I think I just internalized so much of that pressure. And then I put that pressure onto my child. And a lot of the times, rather than just soaking up and enjoying that connection, I kept being focused on, okay, well, how can we improve this? How can we work on that? I mean, they're amazing. They have so much potential, but I'm geared by so much fear for, can they do this independently? I have to get them to do this. I was just driven by so much fear and worry that along the way, I think I wasn't enjoying and connecting with them enough. And that's kind of a hard pill to swallow now when they're 16.
But it's so
And
easy to have hindsight,
mm,
you know?
as I say, I hope things are a bit different now. But at the time, then I really did feel, and I had a few moms in my community, and we all had this crazy pressure and anxiety. And I think that is sad, but it does sometimes get in the way of connection. And now I'm really cognizant of that. But it's tricky because I now have a teenager who's very much wanting to be independent, wanting to do all the natural things, but also has this great aversion to therapy or anything remotely looking like that kind of pressure.
Mm.
So I do have some big mom guilt about that. But now I'm focused more on, you know what? It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. I'm taking the long view. I'm trying to just focus on enjoying the connection I have with this person because after all, why do you have children? Yes, you want them to be independent or independent as they can be, but overall, you want a connection to this person. You want them in your life. I mean, at least I know people have children for different reasons, but that's at least why I had children.
Yeah, I think that's
So
pretty
to
common
mm,
to want to be in a positive relationship, with a child. No.
I mean, people do have other reasons. I think my priorities are in place now. But of
Mm.
course, it's a lot harder being a perimenopausal woman with a super hormonal teenager and that fun storm that, like, why does it have to happen that way? But it's funny now. I really appreciate those moments of closeness and I'm letting things be a lot more organic than when they were younger. I mean, teenagers are sort of funny creatures, you know. You have to let it sort of be on their terms. But when the hugs come, I'm like, yes, you know, not many 16-year-olds are like racing at you, but it's these sweet little moments. I really savor those. That's, I guess, the main thing that is occurring to me being a pioneer.
Parents of kids who've been diagnosed later, I will say, or I have peers whose kids are around the same age, but their kids were diagnosed last
Mm,
year, will ask me, like, well, what are you talking about shame? Like, what are you talking about internalized ableism? Like, we don't have that. You may not, but there are parents who are still, when their child is diagnosed, they're still coming from that place of not knowing everything that you know. If you're on TikTok with all the like neurodiversity
mm,
affirming quote unquote trends, like I love all that stuff and anything that's going to destigmatize, but not everyone in every cultural bubble, even in the United States, is getting this message. I do have parents in my groups who are like super proud that they got their 4-year-old 25 hours of ABA therapy. That might be wonderful. And it all depends on the relationship and it all depends on what that kid
mm.
needs and how the parent is responding to it. But
this idea that we're pioneers does really ring true to me, because I can
Yeah.
see like the whole spectrum. Even right now, like things are still in infancy as far as I'm concerned, as far as radical acceptance and especially in the neurodiversity affirming space.
Yeah. And to be clear, like radical acceptance doesn't mean that people don't need supports. Where things were at for us back then, I think, unfortunately, the focus on this therapy at all costs, it was traumatic in some ways for
Yeah.
my child. So I have a healthy dose of skepticism, but I know at the same point, even as an adult, people do need supports, provided it's affirming and it's the right support. And they're not all created equally. I do have some regret over that. But again, you're forced, like your kid really has to do all this. But looking back on it now, I can see, and now obviously that my child is able to really explain these uncomfortable feelings they have about certain settings they were in. It could be more subtle things. I'm not talking really overt abuse, but enough to have this sort of lasting feeling about things that they've endured. And this idea back then, anyway, that maybe it was a little bit more focused on the narrative of you need to improve, you need to change, you need to be fixed or whatnot,
Yeah,
as opposed to the
comply.
narrative today. Yeah, as opposed to I hope the narrative today where it's like, look, you know what, we're just going to really help build some supports for you just to make your life a little bit easier. And we all we all need that, but it has to be done in an affirming way.
Yeah. I mean, teaching is important. Any child needs to be taught things. Some kids pick things up by osmosis a lot more easily, and that wasn't the case with us. And this idea of passing or the autism becoming unrecognizable, like that, I hope is becoming a thing of the past.
Well, and this is the funny thing. This is why it took me so very long for the penny to drop in my case. It took almost 10 years, in fact. And I mean, very little was known about autism in girls and women. So there's, absolutely no blame in terms of my childhood. My mother, you don't know what you don't know. It was just not out there. I was incredibly like pathologically shy. Things were excused. I was always sick with migraines, all these big social occasions. My mother would be so disappointed because even these things I was looking forward to would always just blow up and end up with me in a bedroom in the dark, throwing up or whatever. It was horrible, but nobody knew. And it took me so long to finally start reading little bits here and there and think, oh, you know what? Hmm. My child is rushing to cover their ears at the hair dryers in the washroom, and so am I. And gee, I have this instinctive way of shopping for them because I am so particular about what I wear as well. So I know instantly whether or not that top will be something they can tolerate or not. Hmm. It still took me almost 10 years to realize, you know what, something might be going on here as well. Because again, I had masked for so long.
Yeah.
I mean, my child cannot mask, which in some ways is actually better for their mental health. I mean, maybe they wish they could mask because they're really all about fitting in right now,
Mm.
being at that stage in their life. But we know it doesn't help your mental and physical health in the long run. We go through burnouts and shutdowns. But yeah, eventually, almost 10 years later, I thought there might be something in here. And I asked my doctor, who fortunately is quite an open-minded woman and has had me at a patient for a very long time, so knew I had a son on the spectrum. And she was willing to put me forward, have an assessment through kind of a major center here in Canada. Because I think, had I done anything privately, I mean, just morally, I didn't agree with having to pay thousands of dollars. But even then, I didn't really trust unless it came from some like kind of prestigious or really recognized medical establishment. I had all this imposter syndrome, so I had to get it done through the proper channels. And then I got my diagnosis 3 years ago now. But again, it's interesting like how it shows up. There are so many ways that things are just, my profile is so different to my child's. In some ways we're alike. As I said, when they were little, I've had this instinct and empathy because I could relate to a lot of the sensory issues, but in so many other ways, they're completely opposite profiles. And that has made parenting really difficult because my child is prone to big meltdowns. It's all very external with them, whereas all the anxiety and stress for me just is internal and then it combusts. So there have been times where it's hard to juggle my own sensory needs, my own traits generally, while being a parent to a kid who sometimes has like significant challenges. So I'm lucky to have a partner who could stand in and is wonderful now that we have this awareness. I can say, like, I know this is my trigger. I'm having a tough time. I'm going to lie down, whatnot. I'm very lucky in that regard. And awareness is a big thing, but it's sometimes tricky balancing. Their needs always have to come before your needs. So as an autistic woman and mother, it can be challenging to juggle that when you have your own, especially I remember when my child was a baby, they were calling it colic, but it was like colic that rolled on and rolled on till they were well past a year. And then I remember even as a toddler, they were always whining and crying. And I couldn't handle the crying and the lack of sleep and just all the heightened sensory stuff. But of course, had no idea about any of that. So again, I'm hoping the tide is like really changing on this, particularly in the UK. I feel like the UK is a little bit ahead of us in North America. So I'm really hoping that like prenatally, postnatally, that autistic moms are getting more support and aren't being gaslit and are accepting support because that's part of it. When you mask forever, you become accustomed to not accepting help or recognizing that you need support.
Yeah, good point. The process of diagnosis, can you talk us through just any part of that that you're willing to, like the nuts and bolts? And I know it'll be different
Sure.
place to place.
I wrote about this once for HuffPost a few years ago after it had happened, and I had a lot of people asking me. I thought, oh no, I really want to be helpful, but it so varies according to your country and your state and what resources are where. In my case, also, there's a level of strangeness because it was in the middle of the lockdown. So I did my assessment over Zoom over hours, and there were a panel of people. So again, it may be quite different
I just want to hear
to
your
where you
story.
go. Generally, when it's an adult and not a child, they want somebody who was present in your childhood, who figured strongly, either a sibling or a parent, to talk about what you were like as a child. My mother came on the call for the first hour, maybe, and shared, interestingly, through her lens. It was very strange. Julie was always sick. Every little thing in her room had to be, but she was. Anyway, my mom made all kinds of excuses and danced around things because she still didn't quite understand what the questions were really getting at. That was one part. Full medical history. I mean, really nitty-gritty medical history. And then just a lot of interviewing about relationships, work experience. It's so exhausting. It was pretty much autobiographical. Mine was over 3 hours, but sometimes I think they're longer and they can span over a few different appointments. I think I had a break and then went back, but mine was all done in one day. There were also tests, which were strange. One was a picture book with no words, and you had to recount what you thought the story was, like a children's book. Um, Another thing was having to describe all the steps in brushing your teeth. Again, really bizarre.
In Ocean's diagnosis, I
Okay.
remember that one.
Yeah. And obviously, you have the standardized testing, which you do ahead of time.
Yeah.
Just the checklist forms.
Fine.
Anyone can get those online, which is kind of a good starting point. Trying to think of what else. Yeah, just some strange exercises like that. But I mean, they're listening to what you're saying, but they're also really observing other things in between the line. I was surprised and also not surprised when it came through. In fact, I scored a little higher than I thought. It's funny, you're thinking I expect this, but then they tell you there, then you're almost a little bit defensive. Like, really? I didn't I didn't really expect to be diagnosed. And if I did, then I expected to not sort of maybe rate where I had. I think there was a number chart and a 10-page report. I mean, I know someone, a friend of mine was recently diagnosed. She was like a little bit younger than me, but trying to process this, like, just take your time because it doesn't happen in the first month. It doesn't even happen in the first year. It's just really slow. And there are all kinds of phases. You feel a little bit of denial, and then you feel a bit sad for what you didn't know. And if you'd been diagnosed a lot younger, how would things have been better potentially for you? And then you kind of get in your zone a little. The point I'm at right now is trying to just have a little bit more grace about it, trying to have the awareness of my triggers and being a little bit more open and relaxed, trying to mask less and figure out how do you even know the difference? I'm the opposite to my child as well. I mean, they, in some ways, are liberated. They're not a people pleaser. They have marched to their own beat forever. They, are not a rule follower like I am. So trying to let go and just to stim a little bit freely, to not worry so much if someone's going to look at you and someone's going to judge you, or, am I not really autistic looking enough? How dare I take up space in this community? All kinds of things, but it's not something that happens in a month. It's I'm 3 years on, and the capacity really varies, and I still have days and phases where I feel a little bit bitter, wishing I could handle more. I am affirming, and I love certain traits that I have. I would not be a writer. I would not have that hyper focus and some of the amazing connections I have on a sensory level with nature and animals. And there are a lot of wonderful, wonderful things, and music, special interest. But on the flip side, you get days where things are still harder and you feel more autistic, and you definitely feel weighed down. And as a parent as well, because parenting is 24/7. I know some people choose not to have children because it is just hard enough for them managing themselves. Um, and doubly so when you have a child and you're trying to manage them. So we just do the best we can.
Right. Can I ask, did you tell your child your diagnosis right away, or that you were going through the process? And
Yeah,
how would
it was interesting because they were like, "You can't have autism." At the time, they were 13, and they were like, "Yeah, because your autism isn't like my autism." Because we've been very open about that whole conversation with them from, I think, around the time they were 7, because they were coming home. My child's non-binary. They, as a child, were coming home at around 7, "Oh, I'm bad," and they were really internalizing and thinking. So we've been very openly and gradually having the conversation about their different wiring for a long, long time. But yeah, when it came to me, it can't be possible because you don't struggle in the ways that I struggle. Like, you're so different. And this, well, Johnny, who's non-speaking, and look how you are, and look how I am. It is a spectrum. So we're still trying to get around to that. But I think in some ways it's nice that I can say, oh, you know what? I really struggle with that too. This is what helps me. Or there have been phases where my child, though, is like, I think there's a little bit of blame. Like, I got this wonky side from you. I mean, I think they enjoy certain aspects of their neurodivergence when it suits them, don't we all? But there are other elements when it's hard and they really just want to be like peers. I think there is some resentment there. I mean, it's a flip side. I think sometimes it's great to see, well, look, dad's ADHD, and you get sort of this side of these amazing and fun quirks from him, and then you get these sort of things from me. But I think sometimes it feels like a hard thing for them. And rather than looking to me and saying, she's doing okay, I think sometimes there's just still a little bit of resentment there that this is hard for me and I got this from you.
That makes
That
sense.
makes sense. But again, it's awesome to be able to have these conversations and for me to try to share the coping mechanisms I have. And again, my kid's totally different, but I think it does in some ways help them feel less alone, knowing dad goes through this, mom goes through that. This is how they deal. These are their cool hobbies or quirks, and I'm like them, and that's cool. So it really depends on the day. Sometimes it's very affirming and positive, and other times I'm 16 and I just want to get my license and I just want to go to parties like everybody else. Why is it not like this for me? Yeah.
My son asked me when we were talking about his diagnosis if I had autism too.
Mm.
And it was kind of heartbreaking to
Yeah.
have to say no. I did share the
Yeah.
diagnoses that I did know about at the time, but he was looking for that connection. He was seeking that. Yeah, so I shared we both have sensory processing challenges. I shared the ways we were similar. And then always there are going to be ways that we're different from our children. And I think that as kids develop, that's just a hard part of growing up. Any kid.
Well, and this is it. Like, even in the case of my child and I, like, we have very different profiles. It's still autism, it's still spiky profiles. But as I said, it shows up in different ways for us. And even now, what's strange is watching them grow and evolve, and their sensory profile is like a lot different than mine. They've kind of evolved. They're not nearly as sensitive to noise and smells. And I find I'm the one now, oh my God, that smell, we have to open all the windows. And can't you? Yeah, that doesn't bother me.
Yeah, my son too.
Like crowds. And I'm thinking, what? You used to scream the house down. So it's nice in some ways for them, but maybe that's a perimenopausal thing. I've heard that things can intensify.
Well, I've always been that way. And yeah, we
Okay.
used to share those traits. And now he's much more seeking, and I'm still defensive.
Yeah. Well, and there's the trouble, I think, for parent and child, whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, when that clash happens, that's the hard thing, is knowing how to support each other when you're coming at it from different places.
Right, but we have empathy for each other,
Oh, absolutely.
He, just because I'm very open with my strengths and challenges and always have been, I think he gets it, but he has to sometimes remind me, like, no, Mom, I'm not like you in that way, and I'm not bothered by his best friend's dad is in like a hard rock band who plays in like little tiny dive bars, and he went to a bar and listened to the band set the other night. The set is at 6 and minors could be in the bar till 7. So it was like this whole new experience for him and he loved it. And I'm just like, that is my worst nightmare. Yes, I suffered through it my entire adolescence and young adulthood, but it is like, I'm not going,
Well, and that speaks to this whole idea of a long view, right? Whoever your kids are at 3 or 7 or 13 or 16 is not even the person they're going to be when they're 21 or, 35. And it's cool as a parent to watch that because you sort of have no way. And that's the great fallacy that I would tell myself as a parent back then when I was just obsessing and worrying and trying to control and wanting this best possible outcome for my child, that I was told I had, I had power over this. If I got them, if I did all the things, if I got all the right interventions, and
Yeah.
I was doing it all. I was doing the social groups, I got the floor time, I had it all going on. But really, you know what I could control was the connection. They're their own people, and it's just fun to watch that evolution and watch them grow. And it sort of blows your mind. And again, we worry about so much minutia on the way. Like some of the things my child can do now, it's amazing. They're doing their own laundry, and they're like taking in the garbage, they're doing stuff. Just certain independent things. And I see them walking around, they're listening to their music on their headphones. It's really cool.
Mhm.
But at the same point, they still don't tie shoelaces.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, well, one day maybe, but I'm not going to lose my mind about it. And there are loads of shoes now. Skechers have been invented. I don't have shoelaces. They don't have shoelaces. I have enough gray hair. I try not to worry about certain things
Mhm.
because I've already seen enough in the way that they're evolving to know that, just relax a little bit more, enjoy the connection, let them know that you're there for them. You'll support them, you will help them learn whatever it is, and let them kind of steer it a little bit more, not just live out of fear every waking minute. Because it's just not good for our health either.
Yeah.
Among other things, it's that stress and worry is just toxic.
Before Ocean was diagnosed, so he must have been 2, I was so stressed and worried. And I just remember this so clearly. We were walking in our neighborhood, and he asked me, was I the kid you wanted? And we had been telling him forever that he was so wished for, and we had fertility issues, so we wished and prayed for him. But he was really asking, like, was I the kid you wanted, or did you want another kid? And I wish I had written it at the time, because his words were so, they just stopped me in my
Yeah.
tracks and made me realize that my worry and anxiety were making him feel like there was something wrong with him, that, and I wished I had a different kid. That really woke me
Oh,
up to the anxiety. That
yeah.
that was heartbreaking. So I did get down on his level, sat down, I took a breath, I took it seriously, and tried as best I could to reassure him that he was exactly who we wished for. And I was so happy that he was my child and no one else. And I realized it was that anxiety, that worry that I was carrying around, because it wasn't fitting, right? Like you were mentioning, the colic that turned into the meltdowns several times a morning, like just so many meltdowns all the time. And I felt like I didn't have the tools. And then, signed him up for this great preschool, and they didn't have the tools. And he was just in distress. That was the word they used. So that was the point we were at before he was diagnosed. And that's why I was so relieved when he was finally diagnosed. I mean, I say finally, but he was 3. And yeah, I just never want him to feel that way, like to have that feeling that I wished that he would be a different person, because I absolutely don't. But that kind of internalized ableism and worry, and that
Mm.
feeling of not knowing, being out of control, the confusion, the expectations that were one way, meeting the reality that's a totally different way, definitely took a toll. And you were talking
Yeah.
about the toll of stress, like that could be the toll of stress on our child. And that's why
Yeah.
um I'm such an evangelist for that radical acceptance.
And I appreciate, I mean, that's what's so important about the message you're
It is.
sending. I wish in some ways I was, not that I want to start all over again, but
Right. Oh, I would hate that.
if there's one thing I could have was just to have that knowledge and to have a community out there and
Yeah.
moms who were sending the message that you are sending to the people you work with. I wish I'd had something like that back then, just to take away that humor me, because I'm on a kick about dogs right now. But as parents, you've got all this worry going on in the background, but like pets, children as well, they pick up this emotional energy. You're doing the best job in the world as a mom, but they can sense this, Ocean could sense this anxiety in you, and they're internalizing that, oh, it's because of me, you didn't want me this way. And it's heartbreaking, but they can sense the kind of emotional energy that we're putting out there.
And we're so
I mean, no parent has a crystal ball or has control, but I think certainly my personality type has always been, oh, if you just work hard enough, you just follow the rules. I mean, I came at motherhood like that. I'm going to do all the things. I'm going to do it right. And then autism diagnosis, no problem. Like, I totally love my kid. I'm going to do it right. I'm going to get everything for them. I'm going to be like super mom or whatever. But ultimately, we do our best and we show up, and we still have no control over whether or not our kid ends up at Harvard or, ends up in jail or anything. It's kind of blind faith. You show up, you do your best, you try to keep a connection throughout, and just, enjoy the person you brought into the world. I don't know. That's where I'm at right now anyway.
absolutely. Yeah. You were talking about the minutia, and, buttons were so important to me. Like the fact that he wouldn't wear buttons, and I wanted, I wanted the teachers in pre-K, 4 years old, and I wanted them to work with him on tolerating buttons. Now I'm like, are you kidding?
But that shirt is so cute. You have to wear that
Yeah,
shirt.
and
It's
my
so
aunt kept
cute.
sending these
Yeah.
beautiful, like polo Ralph Lauren
Yeah.
plaid button-down shirts. And I was like, oh, he would look so adorable in that. So I would send them to the school, and they would send him home in these shirts, and he would get off of the little school bus screaming at me. Like, he would hold it together until he got home. And then as soon as he got off that bus, he would start screaming, get it off me, get it off me. It was like, there was like a t-shirt underneath, but something about it, he was
Yeah.
just, and
Yeah.
I couldn't understand it. And you were talking about old videos. I have a video that I took of him having this meltdown, and I feel horrible about it. I feel so much shame around this, but I took a video because I wanted them to see what we were experiencing at home, rather than just help him take the shirt off, unbutton the buttons and turn it off so he would, be able to regulate. And sometimes it really just is about the buttons. And it really just is about like changing the school. Sometimes it really just is about letting them have less stress in their lives. So that's my embarrassing story, when I didn't know better. And I just equated like the idea that he couldn't tolerate buttons as, if I could change that, it would change all these other things. And I could, like you were saying, have this control like over his trajectory and his development. Meanwhile, 2 sisters in the last 5 years have gotten married. I have much younger sisters. The first one, he wore a polo shirt and a vest and, pull up. And I just put Velcro on the inside of the vest and cut off the buttons of the polo shirt. And he was fine. And he looked adorable. The second one was this September, and he wore the full suit with the buttons, with the vest and the jacket and the button-down shirt and the regular pants and the belt. He did it all. And his sneakers.
The heartbreaking thing is, I think when kids are really little and they just can't express it, and they express it the way that they can, and we flounder around trying to play detective and we can't quite figure it out. He was quite obvious.
This on me,
Yeah.
But when he was
And
younger,
then
it
obviously
was painful.
it's so different, right? I mean, I can actually remember certain clothing items from when I was young, and I remember this pink top I had with these frills. It was cotton, but the frills had a sort of internal seam. And I can still remember the itch and the constant discomfort where I couldn't think about anything else. But I was this quiet, perfect little girl. I didn't say anything or complain. But you can betcha, as soon as I was an adult, my husband was saying this to our teenager the other day. Well, your mom didn't wear jeans like until, I don't know, late 30s. The entire time I knew her, she never owned a pair of jeans. And I'm
As
like,
soon as you could choose your own clothing.
yeah,
it
as soon
was-
as you could choose. But I mean, we don't want children, obviously, who are masking as heavily as I was and who just
No.
suffer through things like, your child was like suffering all through school and then melting down. But it's very hard. You're trying to be attuned to things, but it's hard. You're always trying to play detective for your kid. Until and if, and I mean, and some people are never able to express that. So it's really difficult trying to figure out those clues, and when they're
like,
ready.
just
And they may
always
never,
on.
and
Yeah.
they may never. I mean, some things evolve and some things get worse, or there are new things that pop up, I mean,
Right.
as an adult, just because I'm in middle age and I've got this far in life, there are still things that people need support with,
Sure.
So that's why I think the argument for late diagnosis is valid. I mean, a lot of people think, well, why bother? What's the point now? I don't want any special services, but if there are small ways that I can tweak things in my life, or just these subtle accommodations can make all the world of difference to people at any age.
Yeah.
So why not do that? It's not going to cost the government or anybody else anything.
And even if you did want or need accommodations from the government or from your job or from your family, why not? When your friends, why not? Like,
Yeah, I think that's the
equity.
argument, though. People don't want the burden of the state having to help. And they just think, what's the point? You've got this far in life. Well, no, if you can have a better quality of life, if you can practice better self-care, that's better for your mental health and physical health. And it's therefore better for everybody's health, especially if you're a caregiver.
Yeah.
It's like of paramount importance. And just to have that level of grace and understanding with yourself, it's difficult. It comes and goes. I think it's really important at any age. It's definitely affected the way I show up for my child for the better, because I don't know if I would have had all the realizations. I don't know if I would have had the same connection with my child if I hadn't realized some of these things about myself.
Yeah. Thank you. You mentioned that recently your teen and you sang a duet. Can you tell me that story?
Yeah. Sometimes I think trying to corral your teenager, like, come spend time with me. We used to play a lot of board games. It's like what I would do now just to play another game of Monopoly, because we used to play it billion times. And I thought, I can't. And now it's the opposite. What I wouldn't give, please watch a show with me, watch a movie, or do you want to hang out? So you have to be a little cagey about it now. You have to just enter the orbit and just hang out. And it's you take these little small moments when they come. You can't force them. So something that my teenager and I just randomly started doing, they love David Bowie and we both love music. And it's been really fun, like watching them discover some music that I like and bonding over certain artists and certain music. And we end up duetting and harmonizing to Space Oddity. That's kind of our thing. We'll dim the lights or whatever, and we'll act like we're orbiting and floating around the room. It's quite fun, and it's like a nice way to relax before bed. Or just like balloon fight, just random silly moments.
I'm
And,
a huge Bowie fan. So the idea
you
of
can picture it.
my son being into David Bowie and singing along together just makes me so happy.
Yeah. And they've got quite a nice deep voice now. So we really hit some nice harmonies, if I say so myself.
That's so sweet. That's lovely. I want to make sure that we mention you're on Instagram, Julie M. Green, and The Autistic Mom is your Substack, right? Okay. Anything else you want to make sure we mention before we wrap up?
I do have that memoir coming out, but it's not going to be for about around this time next year. I can't take credit for the subtitle that you love because my editor came up with that, but Generational Autism and Parenthood and Radical Acceptance. It's basically a lot of contrasting and comparing my experiences growing up and now with my experiences from basically the time of pregnancy to my own diagnosis. So
Well, let's
I'm
have you back
hoping that
on.
it's deal.
Right, wonderful.
It's been fun.
Really,
Thanks for having me, Kate. It's good to chat with you. And
thank
thanks
you
for
so
the work
much.
that you do as well.
Thank you for joining Atypical Kids Mindful Parents. I really appreciate you walking alongside me